Today, Paul and I are going to dive a little deeper on the ideal composition of sales and marketing teams.
We're building the ideal composition.
Amazing. See you in a bit. Here we go. All right. Here we go. You ready, Paul?
I certainly am.
That was a new approach to things.
I like the new approach. By the way, everyone, I found out about the new approach about 30 seconds ago.
Yes.
Like delayed on me last minute.
I keep you on your toes, Paul.
I have to be nimble.
All right. So this is something that not necessarily that I hear about because people don't ask me about sales teams, but it's something that I see going around a lot. Obviously, I hear a lot of questions about, like what a marketing team should look like. I've been in a lot of marketing teams. I've structured a lot of marketing teams. So I thought it'd be an interesting discussion. But let's get started with you. How should we think about your sales team? How as a business leader, sales leader, whatever, should I think about the sales team and its structure?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and I think there's a variety of, honestly, I think there's no set team or pre-programmed team that you should build, but I do think that there's some questions you need to ask yourself before you build your team, right? And that's where I would say the first thing you need to ask yourself is, how much inbound do I want, right? Or how much inbound am I going to get? And how much outbound do I want to do?
Right.
Right. So
that's interesting.
Once I've answered that question, let's assume it's outbound. Most people who start a new company have to do outbound. It's very rare that you can just live off the inbound unless you're really lucky. But and then usually you need to start by saying, what kind of prospecting is this person or these people are going to do? And do they need to be on the road or do they need to be sitting in the office?
Right.
So obviously during COVID, most of the stuff's in the office, even if you're eventually going to be on the road. But there are people out there doing stuff. So that's your first question. That's your first question you need to ask yourself. But before I go into a long diatribe of discussing, let's talk a little bit about marketing, because I'm curious to see, and then we can bounce back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, and I like how you set it up, because the reality is true. There is kind of this inbound versus it's probably not the right word, but inbound and outbound. And you're right, when you're starting things out, you're very dependent on the outbound. What I would say for the marketing team, the way I normally see it is, and maybe I'm oversimplifying, but there's two types of companies, right? There's kind of the smaller, just organic growth company, there's like 5, 10, 20 people working there, and you're just growing organically and this and that. And then there's kind of these high growth companies. Usually they tend to be venture backed, or investment backed. So they have external investment so they can fund their growth beyond the revenue that they're actually producing. And I think those two types of companies need different types of marketing team. So I think the first set, like let's say the smaller organic growth one, should invest mainly in content. I think, like ultimately, because that's what you want to drive, right? That you want to help your salespeople at the end of the day, either driving new leads, but also just getting recognized. And in these days, the way to do that is with content, right? And whatnot. So I think you're probably going to end up with a smaller team, obviously.
Sorry, question.
Yeah.
Doesn't the properties of what you're selling make a huge difference there? Because I hate to do this, but I'm going to do it anyways. Let's say you've got a really simple product. It's like a widget. Like, are you really going to focus on content? Let's say, I don't know, if I'm selling this revolutionary battery, am I going to start writing a bunch of content? I can understand in the service world or in a complex product, right?
Yeah.
You're going to focus more on content. But wouldn't there be that exception? Like, okay, Fab, I've invented this widget that helps you, clean your ears, or super simple, or even
those are the best examples.
No, but even that thing we were talking about there, the don't touch your face thing. So it's super simple. Yeah. Are you really going to start writing a bunch of content on that, or are you just going to?
Well, it depends what your it depends what you're trying to do, right? If you want to build something sustain, I mean, obviously there's all the math that goes behind it, right? Like, can you afford like even a marketing team and this and that, right? Like there are some considerations, but it depends what you're trying to build. Even if you're doing a slow organic growth company, like, do you want to build something more long term? And if it is, well, you do need to invest in some content, right? Like, even if you're just doing, let's say, a revolutionary Q-tip and people can buy one at a time and they're a cent a Q-tip, like, obviously you have to make the math work at the end of the day, right? But are you trying to build like something, okay, whatever, and then get distributed and hope for that? Or are you trying to build long-term something sustainable? I'm guessing I'm talking more to people that are looking to build something long-term.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You're not talking like the overnight guys who just want to make a quick buck and get out. I mean,
right.
We're not talking about that.
So, and I mean, I know this is not the same exact, price range, but if you look at a lot of these companies, like I'm shopping for mattresses now. So a lot of these online companies, they're investing a lot of money in content because, well, that's what they're trying to do, right? Like, they're trying to build this long-term, relationship, and they're trying to build value and this and that. And who's not out there? All these traditional mattress manufacturers, right? And so slowly but surely they're kind of getting pushed out of the consumers.
So you're talking about, so for example, that's a good example. Actually, I really like that example. So I know there's this brand of mattress that they deliver to your house and they roll it up. I don't know if you probably.
Yeah, there's Casper, there's Endy, there's a few of them that.
Yeah, and they you're right, they're creating a lot of content. So, okay, so the first thing you're saying is what I should do is my marketing person needs to help me create that content and put it out there. So are you looking for a writer? Like, what are you looking for? You're looking for a marketing person? You're looking for a copywriter? Like, what is it?
I think ideally you want like a marketing person that has some inclinations for certain types of content production, I should say. So you don't want necessarily somebody who's just going to do content because you are a small team. You're probably going to need to do a few things once in a while. You're going to go to a trade show eventually, or you're going to do a trade show. And you need to have somebody but you need to have somebody who is content focused. You know what I mean? And so what type of content? I think there depends, and we talked about this in some of the earlier episodes, based on what you're comfortable with. Right? Like, so if you're somebody, and like recently I spoke with somebody that we both know who, is not comfortable being on air in front of the camera, right? So I wouldn't hire somebody whose inclination is to do, live video and this and that, right? Because it's not going to mesh with you. You're not going to be able to produce the content. So in somebody like that, I'd probably maybe do somebody more a writer, somebody who's like a strong writer. And so on and so forth. But somebody who's more comfortable with the video stuff.
Too is the person that you're hiring, that first person, obviously has to match your personality. But I would have had the opposite instinct. I would have said, well, if I'm really shy to be doing live content, shouldn't I get someone who is good at that? Because then they can be that part of the business. Yeah,
I'm going with the optic that ultimately the owner is going to be the face of the company. Just because, marketers can come and go. And even though sometimes in smaller companies, there's maybe a bit more of a rapport and maybe less of a turnover, again, just a broad generalization. So I would say get somebody that will allow you as a business owner to step up and be the face of the company.
Okay. All right. I like that. It's interesting. And, it's interesting because sales-wise, let's assume for a second that you need to be outbound. What you really need to do is get a go-getter who understands your product, who's going to open some doors, right? And who's going to be able to bring the business in. And you probably need someone who can do the full gamut of what is considered sales. So from opening the door to closing to account management to account growth. Mm-hmm. Someone who can do it all. So you're not going to suddenly, unless you have billions of dollars, create this standalone company and go hire the salespeople and hire the account managers and everything. But
yeah,
usually, most companies start with when they need sales or outbound sales, they start with a salesperson who's going to be able to bring in the business and manage the whole thing. What really becomes difficult is when you're, there's two hard steps, right? The first hard step is when you're going from yourself as a salesperson to hire someone. And then the second hard step is usually when you stop being the sales manager to your own company. That's a tough step too, when you're handing off the keys to someone else. That's a step, because now you're saying, I'm yes, I'm manufacturing and producing, or I'm even delivering in certain cases. And now I'm handing off the sales to someone who I've hired who's going to be taking care of my salespeople. So that's a second hard step. And I don't think there's any formula, Fab, as far as like, do I need 2, 3, 4? Because what happens is you're going to see as the demand grows, how many more salespeople you're going to need, and you might eventually, if you've got a complex product that requires servicing or back end, growth management. Well, you might have some people on the road, and then some people who are account managing, whatnot. So it really, honestly, it depends on so many things. But
Right.
people say, "Hey, Paul, I've got a company, $100 million, a year in revenue. How many salespeople should I have?" Like, it really depends. It depends on your margins. It depends on your sales skill. A bazillion different things.
Yeah, and the goal here isn't to say like you need like 6 salespeople if you have this much revenue. I think it's more of a, let's call it a framework in terms of what you need to think about. And there's an article that I landed on earlier this week, which granted is a little self-serving. I mean, I didn't write it, but it's a little self-serving, which is the value of outsourcing to consultants and freelancers. And it's really interesting because and I have to admit, I was guilty of that too when I was working in a business that like freelancers and consultants never have, the same level of engagement with your company that an employee will have. But this article, and this is like somebody prominent, who's launched very successful businesses and whatnot. And he said like he believed in that wholly, and he hired all these teams and like the onboarding costs are expensive and this and that. And I think, the rule of thumb that he was suggesting is that once you have something that's your core, let's say in marketing is producing content, right? I want to write my own blog post because this is what's going to differentiate us from our competition, or I want to create our videos or whatnot. Anything that's kind of outside the core, you should seriously think about outsourcing. And in sales, for example, can you outsource the prospecting part, right? There's a lot of like not telecommunications, like whatever. Telemarketing companies out there that, can offer the same services. And so does it make sense to hire somebody to do the telemarketing? Or should you hire you want maybe somebody who's a bit more able to cover the whole gamut of the whole.
That's very interesting, Fab, because again, it really depends on your business, right? So if you have a simple product that you're getting out there and you're cold calling, and you can train someone in about a half a day on the virtues of your product, and they're a good salesperson, then you can hire an outsourced, someone who's going to be doing that telemarketing for you. But it's actually a really interesting, interesting concept to say, well, what's the framework that I need to look at to build the right sales team? And I'll be honest with you, usually when I've done that in the past, it's very much like hands-on. I look at the margins, I look at the sales, I look at the projections, and then I look at the territories, and I look at how aggressive we want to be in growing, right? So I'm helping my clients decide on, and usually you're going in small tranches, you're not adding a whole team.
Right.
I've done that once actually, where I added a whole team within a year. It was a larger company, but we went for it, boom, we added the whole team. And we had success, but we had to look at all that, like margins, expectations. What are our KPIs going to be like at first? And it was a large company. We knew it was an investment. Right. We knew it wouldn't be profitable for a year or two. And it got there, but it took a while. So it's a very different approach than if you're a smaller company that needs to sort of build, sell, grow, build, sell, grow, build, sell, grow, build, sell, grow. You know what I mean? To a point where, okay, then I am where I am. So it's a very, ultimately you're doing the same thing, but you're doing it maybe in a much more rapid process. When you say, okay, we're opening this wing, we have this huge investment. We know it's going to take 6 months to a year to get the business going, but we're willing to make that investment. You're taking more risk, but then maybe the reward can be greater too, right?
Right. And that brings me to kind of these larger organizations or, high growth organizations. And I think there, obviously, marketing becomes a bit more complex. I think for the smaller business, you kind of know that your marketing is working, right? Like you start getting asked, invited on other people's podcasts, or you get covered in the local media. Your salespeople are saying it's getting easier to get people to pick up the phone, stuff like that. Those are kind of these high level indications that your marketing is working, and you're a small organization, and that's probably enough for you at that point. I think a larger organization needs to get, or a high growth organization needs to get a little bit more sophisticated. And honestly, this is something that, I was listening a few things, and it really challenged my thinking. And I think there I would start probably more with the analytics person, which is really contrary to what a lot of marketing people focus on. They're like, the content and the social and the ads and the this. But I think if you are strong with your whole marketing process and how you're going to measure it, and like your reporting and your this and that, I would put a lot of emphasis on that first before going to the product marketing and the content and so on and so forth, because you get to remove a lot of the guesswork out of the equation, and you get to work on your data when you have limited data to start with, right? It's a lot harder to go and clean up like hundreds of thousands of contacts and all their data than it is when you're first starting out.
So yeah, you're just saying, so clean up, have an analytics person there to clean up and have building blocks to grow from.
Right, so that like, okay, this is how we're going to measure it, or this podcast, like how are we going to measure the success of our podcast, and so on. And so you need like somebody who's like kind of dedicated to this operations and analytics.
It's an interesting point of view. And I think, honestly, Fab, I think it's a little bit simpler when you're building the sales team, right?
Okay.
The metrics you're looking at are margin, desired growth, and how am I going to gauge these people? And sales is probably one of the jobs that is the easiest to know if the person's doing a good job or not.
Right.
So it's not, I haven't often heard in my career someone say, I'm not sure if I'm taking the right approach to building my sales team. Usually it's, I don't know if my sales team's maximizing its efficiency. So it's generally that, but I could see, like, in marketing, do I hire 1, 2, or 3 people? What do they do at first? I mean, sales is like the first person to go out and sell.
Yeah. The only thing that I would like maybe not necessarily challenge you, but ask you maybe is
challenge me. I love it.
I do encounter, because like I do talk to like business owners who kind of oversee marketing and sales, and a lot of time they're like, and I spoke to somebody last week, I think that I was telling you about, like their sales reporting is all off and they don't know what's working. They're like, yeah, there's deals coming in, but they don't know what's happening. Like, is it that the reps are being performant? Is it that the industry all of a sudden is hot for them? Yeah. Is it that
there it's not, do we need or do we not need sales? Is like, I don't know if it's the fact that they're paddling that works, or the fact they're kicking their feet, or if they're on a longboat, but I know they're going in the right direction. And
right.
You know what I mean? So it becomes more, that's where you might not have analyzed the data and you might do some tweaking, but usually, well, hey, this salesperson, this girl that I just hired, 3 months ago is doing gangbusters and bringing in a ton of deals. I might not have all the analytics I'd like, but I have a damn good feeling that she's bringing that in. Now, that's a whole other, building the structure to understand your sales and the questions you should be asking yourself. Now, there's a real strategy, right? That you need to really understand. Understanding the size of your team at first, I think, is important, but I think what's much more important is like, what are my KPIs going to be? What are my objectives? What am I trying to do? How am I going to, what margins am I hoping to get? What are they going to sell? How, that's a whole other ball of wax.
You're right. And I think what I was trying to go to, I think like this data person that marketing would potentially hire, if you're a larger organization, I think would be somebody that could potentially help you structure like your CRM and your not build your sales process, because obviously they're not a salesperson, but is your CRM going to be set up to be able to then measure what you need to measure at each stage of your sales process?
Yeah.
I mean, unless we're talking about larger organizations, right? Like organizations that we know there's going to be a lot of growth, there's going to be a lot of numbers coming in. and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and often in large organizations, it's the other way around. Like there's so many people involved that it's hard to establish what works and what doesn't work. And I've been many large organizations that done readjustments that they were sure would make a difference, and brought on by the bean counters that had disastrous effects, right?
Yeah.
And I've been in other companies where they've done spectacular things and reorganized, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah.
So absolutely. So
nice.
So it's an interesting conundrum. What we're really saying is you need to hire a sales consultant or a marketing consultant to make sure you're growing the right way.
Yeah, and that's what I was alluding to with that article that I read is like, fine, let's say you're in marketing and you're like, okay, we're going to be high growth, so we're going to invest in data and analytics to start with before we do a lot of campaigns and stuff like that. That's good, but then let's say like you might want to maybe you can't just justify that salary. You might want to hire a consultant to help you set up your first bases, or like with you, we just talked about, right? Fine, I have like the person who understands the CRM in terms of the nuts and bolts of it, but I still need to build my sales process. I'm not ready to hire a sales leader, like a VP of sales right now, who's going to build everything. I'm going to go with a consultant that can help me structure it.
Yeah.
Or can help the sales manager focus more on coaching and less on how's my sales process set up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Other than that, have you seen are there, do you tend to see a lot of companies that have salespeople that run the gamut from prospecting to closing, to maybe even re-engaging, and upselling and whatnot? Or do you tend to see a lot of disconnected roles?
No, in large companies, well, I've seen both. I've seen companies where you have, prospectors and then account managers and or farmers, and I've seen large companies where people do everything. And it's interesting because people often want to subdivide to get more efficiency, and if you do it well, it can be really good. But most people have a hard time doing it, and it's a little clunky, and your people that are account managing might not be in the right seats, and it's difficult you need to evaluate them and also see what their desire is. It's not because you're good at account management that you necessarily want to do it. So I believe that but I have seen both, and both can work. You just need to see what fits best for your environment, and it's also a matter of culture, right? Mm-hmm. I've seen a few companies like in the logistics business that have what they call cradle to grave, right? So you have a logistics transportation business, and they'll do everything from A to Z, and it works for them. And other companies say, no, we split it up. We have a team. One person sells, one person manages the account. Another person takes care of other stuff, and it all works together. So it's like one big team rather than having a little team that stays with them all along. And it depends on the clients. It depends what you're looking for. It depends on a whole whack of things. And I think both can be good. It's sort of like saying, do you prefer a station wagon, a pickup, or a race car? Well, it really depends what you're trying to do.
So have you noticed kind of when one type of organization fits better than the other, or not?
Well, in large organizations where the client has many touch points or has to have many touch points, often having specialists at each level is important, but it can also go the other way, because if your customer feels they're being lost in the jungle because they have a lot of different touch points. But ideally, if you have a specialist at every level, it's probably the best thing. But you need to make sure you have a cohesive team that understands the nature of the clients, right?
Right.
And I think a perfect example is when you call for your telecom services, as an individual. Often you're talking to 5 people and you have to repeat the same story 5 times. Well, maybe it has to be that way because they're such large organizations. But as a client, what you want usually is, I want to talk to my go-to person who's going to know everything about me. Now, if you have a go-to team, that can work, but usually people are looking for a go-to person. Like if you ask any client, not a company, but any client, you say, what would you prefer, to have one touch point person who knows everything or has access to it? You'd say, yeah, because it's like my person on the inside, right?
Yeah.
They're my contact. And some companies do that really well. And some companies don't do that so well. So it depends on your culture and how you're trying to grow. And sometimes companies in the same field do it very differently from one to the other. And some
Right.
clients prefer this way, and some clients prefer that way. So I've seen a lot of structures that work well, and I've seen a lot of structures that don't work well. And let's be honest, they all have their plus and their minuses.
Right.
Having a team means that you always have someone to talk to, but sometimes having a team means, well, there's no expert. There's no expert who knows everything about my business, right? I have to educate myself a lot. So it's a tough call. It's something you need to look at. But what I will say is when a company, large or small, makes their decision based on what's best for them, for their clients, usually it's headed for failure.
And that's really interesting, right? That I think the answer lies in what's best for the client. Because you're right, the client might not want like a cradle to grave rep. They want to be able to work with somebody who's able to dig deep into their account, whilst the other person's just on the road, virtual road, try to meet different people and sign new clients. And so I think you said it. I think what's better for my client at the end of the day.
Yeah. Now, not to be confused with Sir Richard Branson's statement, which I totally agree upon. In large companies, if you take care of your employees, they'll take care of your clients, right?
Right.
Well, you need to take care of the employees. You need to give them a good working environment. They need to be happy. So it doesn't mean that taking care of the client at the peril of your own employees. It means taking care of your clients and giving the tools to your employees to take care of them correctly. So,
and they're in parallel, right? You have to take care of your employees. That solves a big part of the problem. But at the same time, let's say, you have a software and you want your account manager, fine, to be able to help you and this and that. But then maybe you also want like some, accounting specialists, if you're selling accounting software, to be able to help you like more on a strategic level, and maybe having one person do both makes no sense. And so for your customer, having two roles makes more sense, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something we I'm not sure it's really part of the subject, but hey, we always go off the subject. I think what's really important too in larger companies, which I've seen fail miserably, and again I've seen be very successful, is your marketing and your sales team need to be aligned. Now that's a really easy thing to say, right? Oh, they need to be aligned, or they need to be aligned. But what I mean by need to be aligned is they need to have the same objectives. Mm-hmm. They need to, if your marketing team says, well, my only objective is to get the word out there and sales is your thing, and if they don't have the same common objective, and I'd even go to the extent of saying if they're not basically remunerated similar objective, you're bound to failure. The parallel thing is there. They might not be working exactly together, but they have to have objectives that bring them, the objective's big, so the parallel lines will end up at the same point because it's a big point. So you're coming from different doors, but you're ending up at the same meeting point. So that's important as well. And again, if your company is a complex service company with some products, a complex building structure like some IT company that brings together a bunch of stuff, you need to make sure that your marketing, your sales are client focused, but that you as a company owner are taking care of your people to make sure they are client focused. Mm-hmm. And there too, I'll come back on track to our original discussion, is how do I build my team? The first thing in building your team, and I think you'll agree with me, is what's your vision? What's your mission? What are you doing for your client? And what are the first people that I need to build this thing properly? And I like what you said before. Okay, so you need to have clear data. You might need an analytical person, but I'll challenge you on that. What if the owner, the guy who started the small company, is analytical? Maybe his first marketing person is not analytical because he's the analytical guy.
Yeah, and obviously, like when we're going back to like this idea of like this smaller, let's say this smaller organic growth type of enterprise company, you need people to compensate you and help you in your mission, right? I mean, not that you don't need that in a high growth organization, but a high growth organization, you're probably going to get a lot of quote unquote specialization very quickly, right? Like the owner who is analytical, yes, but as soon as you hire the marketing team, they're not going to be able to take care of marketing anymore, right? Yeah. But a slower growth company, that might never be the case. The owner might always be very involved in marketing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that to say, like, I completely agree. Like, I think, like when you're talking about the composition of your marketing team, it has to be aligned with what sales is doing, right? And so it's nice as a marketer, you're like, it's nice to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to hire like this massive content team, and all we're going to do is like content, and it's going to be like, well, a conversation we had not long ago, like SEO optimized, and then we're going to do videos for YouTube and different type, and fine. But then the sales rep is like, well, yeah, but we need to generate revenue, and while branding is important, and I agree in it, we also need to sit down together and make sure that we're heading in the right direction. And this is kind of tying it back to what you said at the beginning, which is like, how much inbound versus outbound are you going to need, right? And if you have a revenue target and we know sales can do a certain amount with outbound, well, the balance is inbound. And how is marketing going to deliver on that?
Yeah. I listen, I think honestly it's easy for us to sit here and talk about it, because honestly the implementation of this is usually a lot more complex. But I think a good rule of thumb is, what am I trying to achieve? What do I bring to my client? And what are the things that could help me get there? And some people get that, and some people don't, and some people fall upon it in a lucky way and they make it happen, and some people don't. So there's some real interesting questions to be asked there.
Yeah, and you're totally right. I think like that's a good place to start, is what am I trying to do?
Yeah.
Right? And not, I mean, you could look at inspiration from other companies, like Salesforce is obviously one of the big ones that pioneered or that popularized this idea of like having, sales development people, like prospectors, kind of going out there but that might not work for you, right? That worked for Salesforce for whatever reason, but it might not work for you. And don't just.
Oops. Sorry.
What's that?
My phone just started talking to me. I have this new Ring doorbell. When someone shows up, it just pops up. So I'm not an expert there. I need to talk to their customer service people. I apologize, my friends.
That's all right. We know that somebody's at Paul's house now.
Yeah.
Maybe
it was my wife at the front door.
That's good too. All right. But yeah, so look at what you're trying to do. I mean, look for inspiration to others in terms of what's potentially possible, but focus on what you want to do and not necessarily what others have done.
And I like when we get tactical. So what I would say is, someone who's listening to all this is, oh, great, but I don't have any, what are the real takeaways? So you've just given a takeaway now, which is great. But I'd also say another takeaway for sales is clearly think, what realistically would I like to sell in the next year? What am I capable of doing if it's a one-man show? Or so let's say it's a small company. What are my expectations? Where am I going to get this growth? What am I willing to pay an individual to sell this? So let's say it's a huge margin. Let's say you're selling a service and it's all, you're barely any office costs and you're, 90% margin. Well, what's the commission you're willing to give that salesperson? If it's really low margin, what is the commission there, right? So you want to figure that out first. And what are your realistic expectations? Because what I've also seen is some owners of companies are great because they're selling themselves. So It's easy to sell it. You're the product. You're selling yourself. If someone else is starting to sell you, like as a service, well, then you need to have an adjustment and think, well, how am I going to do this? How does this move forward? So tactically speaking, margins, profit margins, how much you're hoping to sell. Is it realistic? Like you just said, look at your competition, look at what's going on out there. And I'm sure marketing wise, like what would you say as well, tactically speaking, what are the first things you should be doing when you're thinking of growing that team?
Well, like I said, I mean, to me, it's like, the first thing you need to accept is that marketing is content, and you need to find somebody who's going to help you put content out there. I think, this idea that, and obviously if you're small, you need somebody who's more of a jack of all trades and able to do a bit of everything. But this idea that we're going to grow by going to a whole bunch of trade shows and whatnot is on the marketing side of things is just not that relevant anymore. And the example I was giving early on of the mattress company, right? Like it's easy for the mattress to be like, well, we sell through retailers, and so it's up to them to do the marketing. Like it's just, but then you look at people that are, yes, they go direct to consumer, but I think there's just, so to me, the first tactical hire is content, especially when we're a smaller team. Like I said, large teams are a little different. But to me would be, how can I get somebody who's, yes, has jack of all trades, is able to help us set up the virtual webinar or whatever, but I need somebody who's going to help me put content out there, and a lot of content out there.
Okay. Good. All right. Hey, this was good. I mean, anything else we want to add? I think we've said a lot.
I think we're good. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Have a great day.
You too.